For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle's so thick, even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. All right, episode 41 of the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. Here we go. Thank you for tuning in yet again. Want to remind you, if you enjoy the show, please subscribe or follow wherever you are currently listening. That'll help us out a lot. Also, you can check out buffaloroamer.com to find out a little bit more and some fun, cool stuff on there. Today on the show is going to be a good one. We got Clay Bonnyman Evans. Clay is an author. He is a thru hiker, journalist, and a really interesting guy. I really enjoyed our conversation. Some of his book titles include Bones of My Grandfather. That was a discussion we had in the second half of the podcast here. Super interesting and moving. The Trail is the Teacher is a book about his AT thru hike. I See by Your Outfit is stories from his days as a working cowboy. He's thru hiked the PCT, the AT, sections of the CDT. He's heading out here shortly to try a section of the CDT, as well as some smaller trails and unique trails, I should say, including the Great Plains Trail as well as others. And we talk about it all. So without further ado, here is Clay Bonnyman Evans, episode 41 of the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. Thanks for hopping on the show, man, and taking the time to talk a little bit. I'm excited. Man, your story, you got a lot to talk about, so we'll try and pick it apart as we can. But how are things going on your end today?
Good. Thanks for having me on, and thanks to my friend Alan Carpenter, who your listeners probably haven't heard yet, but will probably hear before they hear me. He's a great guy that I actually met on the Appalachian Trail. We were out there on the trail in the middle of New York at a monastery where we were camping. These monks let the hikers stay there. And so he was talking where we're from. I said, "Oh, I'm from Boulder, Colorado." He's like, "Really? I'm from Boulder too. This is a true story." And he said, "Oh, what's your name?" I said, "Oh, Clay Evans." And he said, "You're not Clay Evans." And I just laughed. I was like, okay, so what would it take for me to get out on the AT, know who this guy Clay Evans is, be from that town, and then fake it to you? And Alan's like, "Yeah, you're right." Anyway, we've been friends ever since. He had seen my name and picture in the paper. But so thanks again for having me on, and thanks to Alan for, pointing you to me, because I love sharing my stories. Yeah,
you bet. Excited to talk about it. And you got a lot of stories, it seems. And obviously you have a lot of published work. You worked in newspaper industry and the news industry for a long time. You have a lot of independent books published as well, some fascinating stories that I'm interested to try and scrape the surface on. But give me just like a rundown of Clay Bonnyman Evans and how it relates, I guess, just generally your story.
Okay. You want me to start at the beginning? That's always dangerous.
Hey, hit me with what you want, man. We're here for it.
Yeah, I'm a Boulder boy. So although technically born in Denver, because that's where my mom's doctor was, I was raised in Boulder. I did all my schooling in Boulder, went to Boulder High School, graduated, went to college back east, and in fairly short order realized I was not an East Coast person, and had what I call an allergic reaction to the East Coast. And I went off to become a cowboy for about the next 7 years. So nobody in my family was too happy about that. And I always tell people, like, if you got a young, headstrong kid, don't tell them no too much, because the more you tell them no, the more they're going to do it. And I don't think I would have done it for 7 years if people hadn't been saying, "Well, you can't do that. You're from Boulder," So I spent 7 years working as a cowboy around the West, which was great. I did end up many years later writing a book about that called I See by Your Outfit. And that was my first published book, actually. And I just republished that book self-published last year because it had gone out of print and the publisher was no longer in business, which meant I had the rights. So after that, I did sort of do what I wanted in the cowboy world. I did wind up going back to college out in California. And then I went back to my first love, which was journalism. I had done journalism in high school. And people laugh about that, but we had a truly good newspaper at Boulder High School. It was very professional and very daring. And we were doing actual investigative work that got us in trouble with the administration. And, because we were
Great.
It's good stuff. So I went back with the intention, because I was a cowboy, of like, oh, I'm going to have to go to grad school. Well, I got an undergrad degree. And during that time, I was persistent enough to get my first little internship, then a second one. And then my third internship that I got was a big one at the LA Times. And after that, I was able to go to work for the LA Times in Southern California. And, I did that for a few years down there. I loved doing the big time. I'm not a Southern California person either.
Sure.
So I ended up coming back to Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is where my mom's from. And then again, doing newspapers, and then wound up back in Boulder, which surprised me. I honestly didn't think I would ever live in Boulder again. But once I got back to Boulder, things shifted. My dad got sick, and I ended up getting married. And so I was there for a good long time.
And where did your first through hiking experience come into this, and how does that play into your story?
Yeah. It's interesting to me. I did not take my first through hike until I was 53. And it's surprising to me because I knew about it from at least 1999 when Bill Bryson's book, A Walk in the Woods, came out. And then in 2006, I had started an outdoor section at the Camera. And there was a guy, real great guy. In fact, he might be worth having on, named Paul Mignanti. He lives in Moab now.
Awesome.
And Paul, I can give you his contact. Paul called me at the Camera. He said, hey, I am going to quote unquote fast pack the Continental Divide Trail. I said, I don't know what that means. Tell me. And what it was is he was going to start in July from Montana and then buzz. It was super light, ultra lightweight before that was even a term, buzz down in 3 months. And this was pre-iPhone. And so what Paul did was send me a disc every 2 weeks in the mail with his photos and his text. And then I would get it all polished up and we publish it every other week. So we followed his whole hike. And why that didn't get me right then, I don't know, because I've always been an outdoor person. I was doing marathons and ultras at that point. But what happened was in 2014, a young woman who had grown up next to me in Niwot, where I lived, just quit her nursing job and took her dog on the Colorado Trail. And boy, they came back looking good, tanned, rested, and ready, both woman and dog. And I just was like, wow. I looked at all their pictures. So that was the first spark. And I'm not embarrassed to say, but some people think I should be, that I then saw the movie Wild that December. And I walked out of that theater with my wife and I cleared my throat. And she said, I know, you're going to go do that, aren't you? I said, no. I'm only going to do the Colorado Trail. It's only 500 miles. So that's what I did in 2015. And then circumstances were such that we actually left Boulder then and came down south. And of course, I didn't tell her this, but the first thing I thought was, oh man, what's in my backyard is the Appalachian Trail. So I did that one at 54 and I've really never stopped. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. So give me like a bucket list, or not a bucket list, but a bullet point list of some of the trails. Because I saw in your email that you've racked up quite an interesting and unique and lengthy list.
Yeah, it's a little bit diverse. So Colorado Trail, Appalachian Trail. And then I really did expect to be one of these people who's like, all right, next year I'm doing the PCT. Well, life intervened. My mom had some health issues and that just didn't happen, but I wasn't ready to stop. So I focused on knocking off my Colorado 14ers. And then 2018, when I was doing a book tour, I went and did the Foothills Trail, which is a short, gorgeous trail in South Carolina. Here's the thing. If somebody thinks they might want to do through hiking, or especially the AT, you cannot get a more crystallized version of the Southern AT than the 77-mile Foothills Trail.
Huh.
Really great trail. 77 miles, not super hard, but challenging. One big mountain to climb. You go right along the river, one of the rivers they filmed in the movie Deliverance. Really great. So after that, I was doing some appearances down in Alabama, and I did the Alabama section of the Pinhoti Trail, which is not well known. It's a really cool trail that's really maintained very much by volunteers. and that was super cool. After that, that was 2018. In 2019, I got asked to join the board of a very small organization, but we're trying to get the Great Plains Trail really going. And so I was on the board of that organization, and we designated about a 350-mile stretch in South Dakota and Nebraska as the pilot trail. It was a trail that, while not exactly easy, you could walk and do it successfully. So I volunteered to just go do that, and we write about it, publicize it. So I did that, which was real unique. I mean, it was a cool experience. People are like, Nebraska. Well, I love Nebraska. Western Nebraska is gorgeous. I've always loved it. And it was hot and it was nuts. And I saw no other hikers. I mean, I saw a few people in the Black Hills, but like no backpackers, zero.
That's awesome.
And it is a really, really cool part of the world to go through. And it's the first, well, I didn't see anybody on the Pinhoti Trail, but it was the first, I spent a couple and a half weeks doing this 350 miles. I saw no hikers.
That's awesome. I want to start there and dive into that one, because that definitely piques my interest, because I spent 3 years in eastern South Dakota working in radio, and I moved there from Denver and Boulder. After in Boulder, I was in radio for just a year in Denver at KOA. And I moved to South Dakota not knowing anything, being an outdoorsman, and fell in love with it. It's amazing. I mean, the solitude, the ruralness of it, the remoteness and rugged beauty of it, especially if you're an angler or a hunter. I mean, the hunting and fishing there is just out of this world.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah, definitely.
It's just it is a complete diamond in the rough. So I'm interested to hear your experience of this Great Plains Trail.
Yeah, let me just describe the trail as a whole first. And it is a trail, but it's as with any new trail, in many ways, it's more a route. We have routes for both bicycle and foot. You can successfully do it as a all the way through bike trip now. Like, it's totally doable. It's not doable without support on foot through like New Mexico and maybe parts of Colorado. But what's interesting is up north. So really from maybe Scottsbluff, Nebraska, all the way north to the Canadian border, it is mostly doable now. There are enough places to resupply. So it's a cool trail. If people are interested, please go to greatplainstrail.org. We do have a map, and we got a bunch of stuff there. You can read my blog about my trip. Luke Strider Jordan is the only person who's ever walked the whole thing. He's also on our board. And so good stuff there. As far as my trip, again, we designated this kind of 350 miles, more or less. There were some alternates. And so I went north to south. I went up to Bear Butte, which is just outside of Sturgis, South Dakota, which people know from the motorcycle rally. And you go right. Bear Butte is a great place to start. And honestly, it would be a cool place to finish. It's kind of like the Katahdin of that trail. And it is the Centennial Trail for the first 125 miles. So you go up this butte, which is a sacred place to the various Sioux tribes that are around there. And you go up, it just sticks up out of nowhere. And there's like prayer bundles with tobacco tied to all the junipers. It's really cool. Huh. There are, there are buffalo, there are antelope down there, all this stuff. So then I went up there, I summited, went back down, I camped by the lake, and I started south. It is on the Centennial Trail through the Black Hills for about 125 miles. It's great. It's a real trail. There are places where you need to pay attention because there aren't a lot of stanchions and it's very faint, but it's a real trail and it's just gorgeous. And it's really, again, just like the Foothills Trail, that if somebody says, I think I might like long distance hiking, but I'm not sure, go do that in midsummer. Beautiful weather, spectacular scenery. You're going to see buffalo when you get into Custer State Park.
Oh yeah.
And maybe Wind Cave National Park. You will see buffalo. It is really, really cool. You walk. So one of the alternate, if you go one alternate, you go up Black Elk Peak which is the highest. It used to be Harney Peak.
Sure.
But I took an alternate because I hadn't been to Mount Rushmore in a long time, and I go right by, and then you just hike up. I don't know, it's a half hour up, and you're at Mount Rushmore.
That's cool.
Really great trip. Yeah. So I get down to Hot Springs, which is a great little trail town. It doesn't know it yet, but it's got all the things you want. And then I headed west. It's kind of piecing together some trails and dirt roads and going to public property and yes, finding places to camp. And then you hit, I'm going to forget what it's called, the Mickelson Trail, which is a rails to trail that goes, I think from Spearfish or somewhere up there, goes all the way down to Edgemont.
Okay.
And so you follow an actual rails to trail. It's very smooth. It's very easy. There's water. It's all private property. So fortunately, they've got cisterns for hikers and bikers. It's just really cool. It's just beautiful. It's warm, big blue skies, all that stuff. I got to Edgemont, which is like a kind of a rundown railway stop now. But again, the people there are really nice. They're proud to be part of this, Great Plains Trail. And from Edgemont was where it got really interesting because you set off across. Yeah, it's like, I mean, you're walking straight on a dirt road. I don't know. It was 13, 14 miles into Nebraska. And it was really hot. It's dusty. There is no shade. And I mean, no shade.
Yep.
There's water if you trespass, which you shouldn't do, but in an emergency you could. Fortunately, Steve Meyer's the guy who started the Great Plains Trail, and he's our board president. He was out there with Luke, who's the guy who's done it, and they were stashing some water for me. So that's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
So I had that, but I found some frog ponds and stuff, got into the Ogallala National Grasslands. And what I call that now is the Great Nebraska Savanna.
That's awesome.
It is just a big rolling plain. It's grass. It's checkerboard BLM land and private land, and it's not fenced really. I mean, there are some fences, and you're following dirt roads a lot, but some trail. It just depends on where you are. It's hot. It's nutty. They stashed water for me again, but there are places to get water across there. And where you end up going toward is the little town called Crawford. But on your way into Crawford, you're going to go through the Toadstool Geologic Site, which is like a mini Badlands, and you walk right through the middle of it.
Cool.
And then you come to, I'm going to forget what it's called, but it's a Buffalo Jump archaeological site, Hudson Meng archaeological site. I mean, this stuff you get to see. If you're in Hot Springs, you can go see the mammoths. Like, these are real bones.
Sure.
And then you Hudson Meng, and then you go into Crawford, cool little town. They were so excited to have me there. They didn't know anything about it.
That's
and
awesome.
I got invited to stay at people's houses. And then you head out you're going across Pine Ridge, which is a big escarpment. So you're going through, yes, you're on dirt roads, but you're also, then you get on trails, and it's a lot of trail there. And then once you get through Pine Ridge, to get all the way to Scottsbluff, you are mostly on dirt roads, which is fine.
Sure.
But you can also bail at that point and say, hey, this is the end of my hike. Really unique experience. We at the Great Plains Trail would love to have anybody do any part of it and write about it for us and report back, because we think it's got real promise. It's just so many people don't think about the plains as being somewhere you do that, but man, it's gorgeous.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I'm gonna have to spread the word with some of my South Dakota contacts. We're more on the east side, but I have a few organizations that I was part of that love getting outside, and it'd be interesting. Do you have is there a story or a memory that comes to mind from that trip that kind of paints a picture of the experience?
There's lots of stories. First of all, I just want to say, the only time that I hiked with anybody on that trail was a young woman who was working for Omaha Public Radio, not Nebraska Public Radio. She came out and joined me for 3 days, and she did some really nice radio stories based on those 3 days together. So that was fun.
Great.
So I'll tell you the story that I always think of. I had just come into Custer State Park, and I was hot. I was tired. It was 98 degrees when I was hiking. It was nuts. And I found a little hump with some rocks and some junipers on it. I'm like, I know there could be buffalo. There could be whatever around here. I'm just going to put my tent up here. And then I started wandering around, just bored looking around and stuff. And I kept hearing this like, it sounded like an ogre somewhere. And I'm like, I think that's a buffalo, but I'm not actually sure, but I never saw, a bison. So I went to bed and like, I don't know what time it was, 2, 3 in the morning, something. I heard that sound really close to my tent. And I was like, oh man. And I really wanted to see the bison. So I got my red light headlamp, I put my red light on, and I crawled up over these little rocks that were next to my tent. And I looked down, and it was not 15 feet away, a massive bison bull. Wow. And he was snorting, doing what bison do, kind of kicking and all this stuff. And I was like, I actually considered putting my tent right there because he was going to water. And I was like, boy, am I glad I didn't. And that was just so cool. And after a while, I was like, I better kind of turn off my light and stuff. I don't want to piss him off. I don't know how in bullfights do way, but so that was iconic. And then the next morning, it was definitely not the same bull, but I'm trundling along, happy as a clam. I think I've been going for a couple hours, going down, and just right in the middle of this single track is like a massive, massive bull giving himself a dust bath. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I can't go through here. So I had to go way up around the hill. That was the high point for me, with just seeing all the bison in there. And you will, if you go there, you will see them.
It's awesome. Super awesome. That sounds like par for the course for that area too. I remember doing a trip through Custard as a kid with my mom, and the amount of buffalo on that trip and in just in that region in general, really cool. That sounds like a great trail and an awesome trip. What were some of the challenges? It sounded like heat was one maybe, and water.
Yeah. So the thing is, we've designated that as hikeable, and it is, but you have to be willing to do some pretty long stretches. And the problem isn't, sometimes a little bit has to do with water, but what really more has to do is places to stay and public land, and so really you have to be, to do this, unless you had some support, you really have to probably be willing to do some 30, 35 mile days. Not absolutely. I think I never did even hit a 30, but if you were going to go all the way into Scottsbluff, you definitely have to do it. So it really has to do with that. Water is a challenge. If you go in the summer, I mean, the reason I went in late August and early September was because Emily, the reporter, that's when she could do it. I would not go then. I would go spring can be rough out there. It can be snowing and stuff, but I would probably go a little later in the fall or maybe a little earlier in the summer. Resupply worked out pretty well, actually. Like, it actually was not bad. I mean, it depends on your mileage, but there actually are a couple places through the Black Hills where you can buy some food. And then Hot Springs is a great trail town. And then from there to Edgemont, I don't know. It didn't take me too many days. Edgemont, you can stock up. From Edgemont to Crawford, be ready for, like I say, you're walking across what I consider to be a savanna. Now you're on dirt roads or trail, but there's nobody out there. I mean, I saw, I think, like 2 vehicles. So you need to be smart. And really, once you get south of the Pine Ridge, the actual geological feature, and you get past something box reservoir, I forget, Willow Box or something reservoir, then you have to do big miles because there's just nowhere to camp. It's farms, right?
Right. That was one of my questions as well, is just being out in that region, knowing obviously Western South Dakota is a little more public land and a little more open, but a lot of it is just all farmland, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's really some of the difficulty we run into in Colorado too. And like I say, it's doable if you plan and you're smart. And look, sure, you can always hike your miles and hitch back to the next town and stay in the town, in the park or whatever they offer, and then hitch back and go. And Luke did some of that. He did have support in New Mexico, but it's always going to be a little like that. So sure, private property is a thing. But I tell you, I'm tempted. I did the PCT last year. I'm going to do the New Mexico portion of the CDT starting in April. But I'd really like to go from Bear Butte north on the Great Plains Trail, because we've Steve especially and Luke have really done the hard work. But our organization has strung together a pretty good route where it's mostly public land all the way to the border.
That's awesome.
So somebody's got to give that a whirl one of these days.
Awesome. Well, maybe a Buffalo Roamer listener will take a stab at it.
Yeah. Well, and if you happen to have listeners who are into the FKT thing, the fastest known time, Luke is the only person who's done the Great Plains Trail. He did it. It was a different route then. It's right there for the taking if somebody actually wanted to plan and do it.
Cool.
There are people out there that are always looking for those.
Oh yeah, you know it. So of all of the trails, probably a difficult question, but you mentioned you gave us the list earlier, but the PCT, the AT, the trail in Alabama, the Great Plains Trail, the Foothills Trail. Obviously, those are smaller, but is there one of those that sticks out to you for a particular reason? More so than the others, or do you have a quote unquote favorite?
I do have a favorite, and I feel really, really guilty saying I have a favorite.
All right, hit me.
I'm going to give you the favorite, and then I'm going to give you the caveat. My favorite is the Pacific Crest Trail, which is the last one I did. That is part of the reason. It's the most recent. But honestly, so the way I hiked the AT was interesting. I did not intend to hike the whole trail. I was just going to hike right up to around Memorial Day. And then I had to go to New Orleans and give a talk at the World War II Museum. And then a few weeks after that, I had to take my mom to a reunion in North Carolina. So I was like, I'll just get as far as I can get. I thought I'd get about 700 miles and then I'll go home and do the rest. Yeah, well, no. I got on there. I loved it so much. I had to finish. Okay. But what it meant was this kind of odd, choppy hike, and nothing wrong with that. It was still a through hike. It was a calendar year through. I ended up flip-flopping so that I finished back from Katahdin back to Vermont. And I love that hike. I wrote a book about it. I mean, I treasure it more than I can say. But when I set out on the PCT, one of my goals was I want to do this as traditionally as possible. I don't want it chopped up. If I don't have to because of weather or fire, I don't want to flip-flop. I want to start just like Bilbo Baggins or something. I want to start here, man, and I want to go until I'm done.
Absolutely.
And that is what I did. There were some fire closures, a few miles skipped for various things like that. But it was as traditional as it could get. It was as smooth as it could get. I happened to get the right starting date in the right year. All the people I hiked with, the different families I was with, were spectacularly great people. I had glitches. You always have glitches and you have good days and bad days, but really, truly, the things that went wrong are so few. And really, in hindsight, I can really laugh about almost all of them. So it just was such a perfect hike for me. And I adored it. The scenery is spectacular. I'm from the West. It was really cool to hike in the Appalachians, but you're in a green tunnel a lot of the day.
Sure.
On the PCT, it is assaulting your face with the most spectacular scenery every single day. You'll get a little green tunnel, but not a lot. And so for me, it's my baby now. It might always be, I don't know. I'm going to, because I took a couple months on either end of my hike to help with my mom, I was away from my wife and my dogs for 6 months. And we decided we don't want to do that again.
Yeah, it's a long time, huh?
Yeah. So I'm going to section the CDT, which gives me the advantage of being able to tailor my timing for weather and stuff. That's one of the trickiest parts of the CDT, but I'm excited. But yes, PCT is top. And AT, I'm sorry. I know I'm cheating on you by saying that, but the AT is a close second. It really is. At the same time, I also adore the Colorado Trail. It was my first, and I really mean it. Like if this is something somebody thinks they're interested in, go ahead, start small, foothills, whatever if you want. But if you want to try, a month-long thing, go do the Colorado Trail. You will not regret it. If you like this at all, you'll love the CT.
I've heard that the Colorado Trail is just as gnarly and fewer people possibly than some of the other trails. Is that your experience?
So I wouldn't say it's gnarly. The only one of the ones I've done that I would call gnarly is the AT.
Okay.
The AT is insane. The AT was built originally in the 20s and 30s. Now it's almost all been rerouted, but it still basically has the spirit of, we sent a bunch of civilian conservation corps guys out and said, yeah, build a trail over that mountain. And they did. They went straight up to the top and straight down the back for 2,100, 2,200 miles. So it is incredibly steep. So many people have walked on the AT that a lot of the actual tread beneath your feet is exposed roots and rocks. And that's just from so many thousands of people. it's the gnarly one. Now, the PCT is not easy, but it's graded much more gently because by law, it has to be passable for stock. So, mules and horses. It's plenty steep, believe me, in places. And you're going to do lots of climbing, not as much as on the AT. But the difference with the PCT is that I'm getting to the CT, promise, but is that it's just much more remote than the AT. So logistically, it's a lot harder. The AT, yes, physically harder, but the CT to me is like a mini PCT. It's well graded. There aren't too many crazy steep parts. There's a few, that I can remember, but nothing nuts. And like the PCT, it's just eye candy every day, all day. It
Sure.
really is. And Colorado summer, you're probably going to get some rain and stuff. But the year I went, I just had great weather. Of course, I made some dumb rookie mistakes and, got caught in rainstorms. But I really think that the CT, to me, it's like a mini PCT almost. It's great.
Great. And back to the Pacific Crest Trail. What do you have a favorite section or an overarching memory, overarching takeaway from the PCT that you still have with you? I don't know if that's
Yeah, I got home last fall and I wasn't really able to start writing until the end of October, but from October to just last week, I've been writing a book about it because I'm going to stuff of it. So it should be out before the end of this month, but so it's very well cemented in my mind. And that's one reason I do write about it. I take notes, but I forget everything until I really write it down and then it comes alive. And, I'm going to say this, and you've probably heard it from other hikers, but part of the appeal of through hiking is the people. And I consider myself to be I'm not antisocial, but I wouldn't think that's my thing, but it really is an amazing part. So there's always that. I can say, I had no idea really. Yeah, I didn't have expectations, but my favorite single place on the whole trail is Goat Rocks Wilderness in Washington. And that had to do with the people I was with. It had to do with the days I was there. It had to do with the scenery and the excitement of being able to see these big peaks, Mount Adams and St. Helens. And I think we might've been able to see Rainier by then. So, and then there was lots of adventure too. Like there are some snowfields up there that are sketchy. And I didn't know that. I just got up at 6 a.m, headed off by myself. And I'm like, oh, but I like that kind of stuff. I like that stuff. And so that really was my single favorite place. But so many places along the way. Everybody's going to say, oh, the Sierra. And the Sierra is gorgeous. Absolutely mind-blowing. It's like the Alps. And I mean, it's just spectacular. The thing that was interesting for me is it was a quote unquote low snow year. Sure. Yeah. In the Southern Sierra, but in the Northern Sierra, it was a normal snow year, which I should have known. And I didn't. And I sent my ice axe home. So if you go do the PCT, just because you get over those high passes in the Sierra, do not assume that you're out of the snow, because it was way sketchier from Yosemite really north to I-80. Every single day we were crossing some seriously sketchy snow.
I believe that. I believe it.
Yeah.
How about people stories or people moments from the Pacific Crest Trail? Do you have one that jumps out to you, or a couple?
I'll tell you one. I would just have to say, sometimes people ask me like, what's your one piece of advice? And I give it and they're like, really? That's boring. But so I'm going to tell this story because I think it really symbolizes for me that sense of family that you get and the camaraderie. You never know who you're going to travel with. And I had been traveling with a group of 6 that we had gotten together on purpose in Bend, Oregon to hike. And then for various reasons, some of them left behind. And the one woman who continued forward with me, my trail name's Pony, and her name was Dirty, Dirty. And in a way, we were like, yeah, we're an odd couple, but the trail makes odd couples. And it's so great. I hiked more miles, camped more nights with her than anybody. And then as we're going along, and we meet these other 2 women in a little town called Skykomish, and everybody was kind of freaking out because you still couldn't go into Canada because of COVID last year. So what are you going to do? You got to hike back, and then there was a big forest fire. So a lot of people sadly just didn't finish. They got off the trail, but we're like, no. So we met these young women, Beastie and Forget Me Not. They're from the East Coast, teachers who met on the AT. They hiked in 2015 and they stayed friends. They hiked, and then they're hiking the PCT. So I wind up, my last, half of the state is with these 3 women, which it was really fun. It was really just great. And odd couples. One night, the night before we went to the border, it's raining. We got poured on, the last few days. They decide they're going to hang a bear bag. And Dirty knows how to do the classic PCT Sierra bear bag hang. And I'm like, okay, I use an odor-proof sack. I'm sleeping with my food. That's what I do. Sorry. And if it's good enough for Andrew Skirka, it's good enough for me. So we decided to do it, and Dirty just forgot a step. And so what happened was she forgot to attach the food bag. So the carabiner gets stuck way up and there's nothing to do. So we brainstorm, it's raining and we're laughing. And like, I figured out like, well, if we can get up high enough, or sit on shoulders, we'll pull that down and we can cut it high. We'll have enough cord to do it again. We'll do it right, because I got another carabiner. So here we are. We're all just in it together. It's ridiculous. We're so excited. We're going to finish tomorrow. We got a 30-mile day, in and out. And Beastie is like, yeah, I know how to throw this. And the first time she throws it right over. Well, the second time she throws the stone, it doesn't go over the branch, and it just plops out there. And I don't really know what happened, but she just like went charging out after it to get it and throw it again, and immediately slammed into this big tree trunk that I had been standing on to pull the thing down. And she hit hard and went bam in the dirt, face first. And she's in the fetal position. And we're like, oh my God, is she dead? And she was hurt, but she started laughing really, really hard. And then the 4 of us, there's 20 and 30 something women and this old guy, we were like best friends, and we were laughing and laughing and laughing so hard. That moment for me says it all about what that friendship is. And it's like, it just erases all the differences. And I don't know that people will get that by that story, but it just warms my heart to know that you go out there, you meet people, and you can find this connection so fast. It's accelerated. And that's just one. I mean, I have plenty of other stories, but that's certainly one for me.
Absolutely. I completely understand and know exactly what you're talking about on many of my trips. It's, one of my, grand takeaways from some of my trips have been just the kindness of people and the kindness of strangers. And everybody has a story. And, on my Mississippi trip, for instance, paddling the Mississippi River.
Oh yeah.
It's like people offered help from all different walks of life, all rich, poor, white collar, blue collar, super smart, not so smart, white, black, Mexican, you name it. It was like I met all of these Cajuns, like I met all of these amazing people along the river, who, if you were just maybe narrow-minded, stuck in your own little rut in life, you wouldn't be opened up maybe and experience what all of these different walks of life have to offer. And there's so much if you just like strip away the differences, like you said, and take a moment to open up and just, shoot the breeze, or like, have a cold water after a long hike that someone brings you, or whatever it might be,
It's really one of the most amazing things about it. And it's, it's like a kind of boot camp mentality, right? And you're pulling in the same direction, but all these people in towns, that are so excited, and they give you rides, and really all they want is to hear your stories. And it's really amazing. I've heard a lot of thru hikers say, especially on the AT, it literally restored their faith in humanity. So that's really nice. I can tell on myself too, if you want PCT stories, it was so smooth. But I had a few glitches, and the thing that amazes me is I don't think most people in my, what I call the synthetic world, that's courtesy of Dixie. I don't know if you know her Homemade Wanderlust, but she calls it the synthetic world. I don't think a lot of people would say, oh, you're just the happiest guy, but I am on the trail. And I literally had 3 different people or groups of people on the PCT say to me, wow, you're like the happiest person I met. And I thought, well, that's weird. Yeah, don't tell my wife because she would laugh at you. But the thing is, I have much more equanimity and magnanimity and just patience. And yeah, I can be cranky and everything else. But so even the dumb stuff that I did, and I did a few dumb things, I don't know. There was something about it that it was okay. I actually, right from the first day, I just sort of stumbled into this little mantra. It's fine. It's fine. I first said, it's going to be fine. And I said, nope, it is fine. And so I said that a lot. In fact, our last day out, so to escape the border, we hiked in 15 miles to the border, 15 miles back to camp. And then from there, we had to go down the PCT and on the Pacific Northwest Trail to Ross Lake, where Forget Me Not had arranged a water taxi. And it was nuts. It was wet. It was cold. It was this, it was that. And, we knew we just had to get to that lake and, the weather was going to change. But as I was going along and beginning to worry about hypothermia, worrying about the girls behind me, and sorry, I should not call them girls, but it seems weird they're old ladies, the lassies. I was actually writing messages in the mud to them, like, it's fine. And Forget Me Not, one of her things was doable and almost there and stuff. But, it's just that attitude. Look, I've met complainers on the trail. For some reason, I'm not a complainer once I get on the trail. I don't know why.
I know exactly what you mean. And it's that's a great perspective. It's something that I've never really maybe thought about, but kind of intuitively I've always known to be true that when I'm sitting in a canoe in the middle of nowhere on a moving body of water or a lake or out backpacking to a high alpine lake or whatever it is, when I'm away from people out in the woods, whether it's for 3 hours in the afternoon or 70 days across Alaska or whatever it might be. Yeah, I agree with you. I think I'm generally happier there.
Yeah. And, actually, if I had to peg that, whatever we want to call it, that it's fine attitude, the worse things get, actually, the better I get, like the more energy I get and I want to help. And I don't know why that is, but I have that in me. The first time I ever noticed that was canoeing in the Boundary Waters. And it was just a long day. And I don't know if you know the Boundary Waters, but you can only camp in these certain places. And they were awful. So we were rowing and paddling. And my friend was just like sick of it. And so was I. But for some reason, I'm like, well, we got to do this portage. I'm going to do it. And I did it at a run. We had the super sweet Kevlar canoe that I could run with on my shoulders. And I came back, it was a mile or more. And then I came running back and, I had to get the dry bag and stuff. And he's like, what has gotten into you? What the hell? So I like that. I like a challenge. I can be as whiny as the next guy. But when it gets over a certain point, for some reason, there's something that kicks in that says, well, it's fine. We got to do this.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same way. And I have the first time that clicked for me too, like consciously, was also on a canoe trip in Canada, in Saskatchewan as a kid. And I don't know, I guess I would have been 14 or so. And I remember it's just raining sideways, windy, cold. You're 14, away from your family and friends, all playing baseball over the summer or whatever it is. And I just remember it was just a terrible day, waves blowing over the boat, and I was just as happy as could be. And I just remembered a saying that somebody had said that was, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And I just remember that mantra in my head and just being like, well, shit, we're out here. I'm not going home. Might as well enjoy it. Yeah, we got to keep paddling on and get to camp. It's a cool perspective. And there's all kinds of ways to do it, but the outdoors is certainly one.
Yeah, for me, it does open that up. And I was in Boy Scouts, which was until it wasn't. It was a great experience. And my first long hike was 50 miler in the Black Hills. Actually, I'm assuming we were on the Centennial. Well, the Centennial Trail didn't exist yet, but on that kind of area. So, and then, kudos to you. Did you paddle the whole Mississippi pretty much? Or
I did. Yeah. I did in 2017. I did Source to Sea.
Nice. So my friend, the dude, who I met on the AT, and we're still friends. He's a tax guy from Houston. He was supposed to do the PCT with me last year. It didn't work out. He and his wife are starting in early April on the PCT. But he and I have talked for years about paddling the Mississippi. So that's a thing that maybe down the road I hope to get to do.
Got to do it, man. If you have a want for it, amazing.
Oh, yeah.
It's I imagine similar to the through hiking, but obviously a different sport and different way to experience the country. But yeah, I couldn't recommend it more. That's for sure.
All this stuff I do is like leg focused, so it would be really interesting to be like upper body focused. But we've talked about it for years, so maybe we'll get to do that.
On my trip, I met and ran with, and I've had them on the podcast since then. Actually, originally, about 2 years ago now, I ran into on my Mississippi trip a group of through hikers, and they had done, you name it, PCT, AT, I think they've done the CDT or were doing, but they had an interesting perspective, which was completely different from mine, which I found interesting talking to them after the trip, was that they were not digging the canoeing. They were used to walking and getting after it and moving their legs and sitting in the boat all day and then getting to camp and hanging out on a sandbar. They were anxious about it. Or not anxious, but it got to them a little bit.
It would be really weird for me because I've been a runner for pretty much all my life. I'm a mountain climber. I just am very lower body focused. It would be quite different, but I'm totally down for trying it. So my canoe, my weekend, the Boundary Waters was just one of my peak experiences too. So I love the paddling. It was fun.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I'm interested in the story of your book and of you traveling and digging to find your information and the remains of your grandfather. Your book, Bones of My Grandfather. Talk to me just a little bit about that experience. And I guess before we even dive into this, where can people find out more about you and get hooked up with all your different books and all that type of fun stuff?
Yeah, well, my books are all available on Amazon. You should be able to order them in bookstores. Until my AT book, everything I'd published was with a traditional publisher, but now I've got self-published books out there too. You can get them as ebooks or print on demand. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and bookstores. I do have a website, claybonnymanevans.com. I confess that I'm a little lax and a little behind on that right now. I mean, you know how it goes. We live in this era where it's supposed to be relentless self-promotion. And sometimes I'm just like, I'm too old for that shit.
Yeah.
But there's tons of stuff there about all of these adventures, including a rather long, not hopefully boringly long, but fairly long pieces about Foothills Trail, Colorado Trail, Great Plains Trail, anything. Bones of My Grandfather was a book published traditionally with Skyhorse Books in New York in 2018. It was the product of many years' work and many decades of work and wondering on behalf of my family. So my mother's father, Alexander Bonnyman Jr., joined the Marines in 1942. He was 31. He did not have to go to the military. He was running a copper mine in New Mexico, had 3 children, but he was quite upset about Pearl Harbor. So he went in the Marine Corps. He was killed on November 22, 1943 in the Battle of Tarawa. Tarawa is an atoll about 1 degree north of the equator, about halfway between Brisbane, Australia, and Honolulu. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's tiny. It is now part of a country called the Republic of Kiribati, which is just a bunch of islands scattered over 1.3 million square miles of ocean.
Interesting point here is when I was reading, kind of reading about you and about your story here is that, so I've been to Christmas Island, which is the same nation, fishing destination.
Nice.
And
nice.
Interestingly enough, one of the places I stayed was the old British barracks for where they tested their nukes, which would have been around the same era, I assume.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it was actually after. So the Brits got nukes after World War II, but close to, yeah.
Sure.
And Christmas Island is actually the easternmost land in the Republic of Kiribati. So Tarawa was way back the other way. So my grandfather was killed there. The battle raged for 76 hours. Lots and lots of death. I won't go into what happened, but 1,100 Marines and a few Navy personnel killed. About 4,500 Japanese and their Korean slave laborers, Korean laborers that they had captured. It was a debacle that took place on less than 1 square kilometer of sand. It was a mess. So in the tropical heat, things were chaotic and they needed to get those bodies in the ground quickly. They did the best they could. They basically went back after the war to try to find them, and they really only found about half. And then what happened, I understand that they didn't have the technology, but the thing that was unfortunate is that they decided to lie to families. So my mother's family, her grandfather, her uncle, my great uncle, they were desperate to find out what had become of my grandfather's remains. They wanted to bring him back to Tennessee. And they were given every story in the book. My great grandfather died brokenhearted, not knowing. My great uncle died in 2004, not knowing. My mom did a little bit of work on it. And, it's funny to me that it took me so long to do this because I'm a journalist. I'd written books. I think I was a little afraid of it. That my grandfather is my hero since I was tiny. The Medal of Honor that he received, which he did, hung on the wall in my mom's house, on my house, my whole life. But for whatever reason, I didn't approach like that. And he'd sort of turned into a myth in the family. But in 2009, my late aunt had said, hey, and everybody thought that we didn't know that he was still lost. Now we should have, I found out. My mom should have known that.
And so what was the extent that was known?
Well, okay. So essentially the military, the government gave our family and many others just different stories. Oh, well, he was buried at sea. Oh, well, he was buried in this trench. And then they created these beautiful cemeteries, and many of the graves had nobody under there, but there were names. And so we got all these stories. He had a marker at the Punch Bowl in Oahu, which is the National Cemetery of the Pacific. And his name is in gold because he received the Medal of Honor. We went there when I was a kid, and my mom said, well, he's here. He was just sort of buried as an unknown, but he's here. So we had all these stories, and we had all these stories about how he died and everything. It was very vague. Nobody knew anything. And so in 2010, at the behest of Congress, believe it or not, the military agency tasked with finding overseas remains was required to go there and do some work based on research that had been done by a nonprofit group called History Flight. I went down there in 2010 because my grandfather they're all the missing. There are no less of people than my grandfather. He was, however, the only Medal of Honor recipient who hadn't been accounted for. So his name was attached to the story. I went. After that experience, what I realized was it was the nonprofit History Flight that if anybody was going to find him, it was them. And Mark Noah, who founded that effort, and that organization continues to find and recover remains on Tarawa and elsewhere. I'm sure we've recovered up to 200 by now. And it's just unbelievable. For 7 decades, nobody did anything except occasionally a local will dig somebody up. Well, Mark and History Flight have recovered. I don't know if it's 200 yet, but if not, it's close.
Wow.
And so I just made myself available to Mark. I did whatever. I did PR. I went down there. I dug holes. I sifted sand. I contacted families, and I went, I think 7 times, 8, I can't remember, to Tarawa. And then it was always a needle in a haystack. With archaeology, if you miss by an inch, you've missed by a million miles. Well, the lead archaeologist that Mark had hired, Kristen Baker, was very persistent. We had an area, Mark had an area that he believed we would find him. It was a sort of developed area. There was a business there. This is a very primitive sort of place, but it was a shipping yard. And so we couldn't do the work there, but Kristen noticed when they tore down some buildings that maybe we could negotiate, like to dig a big hole in the middle of their business and they could still do their business, which is what happened in the fall of 2014. We started digging 2015. And amazingly, with Kristen's expertise, she found that long lost trench of 40 guys, including 6 others in another trench, but the 40 whose names, 24 whose names were recorded as being buried there, and then 16 unknowns. One of them was my grandfather.
Wow. And,
the soil's can be very disturbed there because there's a lot of poor people live there. And I was just terrified. I mean, Mark said, hey, we found Cemetery 27, which is what we called that trench. You better get down there. So I brought a video camera. I was afraid because any moment you can be finding, they're just, when we say grave number, it just means the body, they're just laid together. Grave 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. My grandfather was supposed to be in 16. Well, at any moment, you could just find out somebody dug a septic tank there. But sure enough, on May 28, 2015, Kristen knew very much what she was looking for because my grandfather had a mouthful of gold restorations in his teeth.
Sure.
He was older than most of his fellow Marines, and he came from a fairly wealthy family. And boom, she saw that gleam of gold, and I was standing there with a video camera on. I dropped the video camera, actually. So it was an astonishing moment. It was as far as I know, nobody in American history has gotten to be a part of that, a family member. It was amazing.
Holy cow. And
yeah,
I have to imagine the emotions, the family ties. I mean, I would think just independently of that would have to be an extremely moving and I don't know what the right word would be for it. Not otherworldly, but different than anything most people experience. What was that experience like? I mean, obviously, I imagine it'd just be a soup of emotions, I guess.
Yeah, and on my own as we were doing this, again recognizing it was very, very probably likely that we wouldn't find him, but I was researching his life because I wanted to write about this, and his life had gotten buried as well in myth and misunderstanding, and some actually false information had been published about him in the 90s, and so I really made it my mission to learn everything I could about him. And honestly, what really came through for me, I got all these letters. I mean, thank God my family were savers. And the hurt of my great-grandparents, and I knew my great-grandmother, the hurt, the deep wound of this loss, the absolute wreckage that his death caused for my mother and her family. And I won't go into that, but I do in the book. And as I was there in that moment, it was hard for me because all of these people were waiting for me to, I don't know, give the Emancipation Proclamation or burst into tears or something. And I just felt the weight of all these people. And I'm not responsible for doing that. I am privileged to have gotten to be part of it. It's Mark Noah and History Flight and Kristen Baker. But I felt that I had done right by my ancestors. I had done right by my living mother and my living aunt. And so it was a very powerful moment. I was a little self-conscious. There were people standing around that hole, looking down at the guy. And one of our volunteers said, I was a little disappointed. It was a little muted. And I said, hey, man, that's a hard thing to be. But what I tell people, and this is the truth, is the next morning, so we've discovered him. We had to cover him, protect him, and then exhume the guy who was next to him. You do them one at a time. You don't want to get stuff mixed up. So the next day we exhumed my grandfather, and the day after that, I went out for my early morning run, and I came back to the gravesite where he had lain for 71 and a half years. I went down there and I had my moment by myself.
Sure.
And that was a powerful moment. But it has to be the peak of my life. I mean, of course, right up there with getting married and doing things, but what an incredible privilege to be part of something that enormous. And then to get to write that book and to publish the book. And I'm still doing events and talking about it. And History Flight's down there still doing that work. So we are doing great work down there. And I mean, I'm just moved talking about it now. I was so lucky.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It was a great experience. Yeah.
What were any of the other soldiers there, or people, I should say, were any of them able to be reconnected with folks who were in a similar situation to you that didn't know what happened? Were they able to be ID'd?
Yeah, tons. So the agency that sort of dropped the ball all those years, that did the first mission in 2010, they got reorganized in the middle of this on purpose because they were not doing their job. There were actually two agencies and they merged them. And, once they did that, they really kind of got smart about what they were doing. Congress helped them along, gave them some targets and things and a bigger budget. And the most gratifying thing that I did was, and History Flight's piece now is working on a contract for that agency. We were frankly outlaws when we were doing it. Our Mark had gotten sick of the fact that they weren't doing what they said they were going to do. And we just started digging, and it wasn't illegal, but they didn't like us doing it until we had the success, and then they loved him. So, but the thing is, the best part for me was having interaction with family and going to some services. These families, it's rare. It was very rare for somebody who's a direct descendant like me, a grandson and a daughter, two daughters still living, because most of these guys were way younger than my grandfather. He went in as an enlisted guy at 31. Most of these kids were 17, 18, 19. So we're talking cousins, we're talking nieces, nephews, great nieces, nephews, things like that. But I'm telling you, it's been incredibly powerful for a lot of people. There were a couple people I spoke to who were like, don't disturb them, let them lie. And that's fine. Those people can be buried in the National Cemetery with honor. But for the most part, this has just been an incredible experience for literally well over 100 families now that they've been identified. They're identified in Hawaii. The families get involved and they have these amazing burial ceremonies. It's really cool.
That's amazing. What an amazing organization and just an amazing story. Is there one piece of that from your book or just from the whole experience that sticks out to you either as like I don't want to say like a clue or like a pivotal moment in the story or the search, but is there anything along those lines?
Well, so the book is set up, and this is not a construct. It's really two narratives. One is happening in the present. Well, it's all happening in the present, but one is reclaiming my grandfather's story, which had really gotten whitewashed and lost in the details. Even my aunt and my mom really didn't know anything about how he'd actually died, just the vaguest. So there's that. And then there's the modern day search for the remains. And so the search for the remains, there were all kinds of awesome clues and this and that. But really what it was is just persistence on Mark and Kristen's part. So for me, my excavation, as I call it, of his life and the documentary evidence, and, I'm going all over the country and going to archives and this and that. Here's the moment that was cool for me. So I mentioned that there had been some really, to me, somewhat offensive revisionism about what had happened that day that came out in a book in the 90s. Guy's a nice guy. I talked to him. He didn't agree. And I'm like, well, you've diminished my grandfather's legacy. Oh, no, I haven't. Trust me, he did. So I had a little chip on my shoulder, but hey, well, so here's the thing. We got the physical remains and we brought them back to the lab. I wasn't allowed to work on the excavation except just a little because I'm a family member. I did a little bit and I helped in the lab. I was helping Hillary, one of our other anthropologists, and we get it all. The bones get cleaned up, they get processed, they get dried. They've been in the sand for a while. His skeleton was remarkably intact. And then, they can do an examination. The amazing thing to me that was so gratifying, and I don't mean to convey like a triumphal attitude or anything, but
no, not at all.
It was incredibly satisfying to me that we had the goods, we had the physical remains that proved 1,000,000,000% that what had been reported in that otherwise pretty good book in the 90s was flat. Can I curse? Flat.
Please do.
Flat fucking wrong. It was wrong. And we had the physical evidence. He could not have died that way. And then from there were additional little clues from the body, okay, that told us, we can't be certain, but it gave some clues about how he did actually die with a reasonable degree of certainty. It was not what was said. That was incredibly gratifying for me. I don't fault the old guy who was responsible for revising the story. He was old. He admitted to my aunt in letters that fog of war, he was no longer living. But I do fault the historian who also sadly died before my grandfather was found. But, that's not responsible.
Can I
You don't take one yeah.
Can I ask what the caveat is, or maybe a better way of asking it is what was the conclusion, or maybe conclusion is too hard of a word, but what did you come to after finding him?
Okay, so I'll give you a little bit. When I'm doing talks and stuff, I try not to give all of this away because it's one of the interesting sort of mysteries and surprises of the book.
Sure.
I will tell you this. It was reported based on one single eyewitness account in 1995, 50 years after the battle, counter to every other account previously, including the Medal of Honor citation and all that reporting. It was reported that he was shot in the face while lying in a prone position. You can imagine. All right, I'll just give it to you guys. But please, if you're interested in the book, there's a lot more to do. He was not shot in the face. We knew that conclusively. His skull was in perfect condition.
Wow.
So I won't go into it, but there were some other interesting clues that did also tell us he certainly was not in a prone position. And again, keep in mind, up until 1995, when this book was published, nobody had said he was prone. Nobody had said that anybody else was there. It was him. That's why he received the Medal of Honor. He stood alone. It was vaguely reported gunshot wound, but there was no documentation of that. That only got into the discussion, in the small circles of Marine Corps history and Tarawa history, whatever, because one eyewitness 50 years later misremembered something. I don't fault him. I do fault a historian who doesn't check that stuff out. And so I was incredibly gratified. And there were other things that I was able, just archives in California. My wife was sitting on a beach and I was in the basement at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, going through archives, and I come across a card written in the very distinctive handwriting of my great-grandmother.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of me solving another mystery. So I had so many moments like that were just, it made me feel like Sherlock Holmes. And it was great.
How long were you professionally, quote unquote, working on this project rather than just it being a part of family lore?
Yeah. And again, I'm a little surprised that I didn't get to this sooner, but you know what? The timing was what it was. And it was
worked out.
Maybe it was just meant to be, so to speak. But so I really got involved in 2010. We found him in 2015. I had written versions of the book long before we found him that were awful and long and indulgent and this and that, but I had a lot of base stuff to work with. And I really completed a version of the book in 2016, got an agent, we were able to sell it, and it came out in 2018. Then I was promoting, and I'm still doing events, but reasonably speaking, from when I really got involved to publication was 8 years.
Okay. Yeah, that's a full-on project. I imagine at times it was almost all-consuming, I would have to think.
Obsessive, and I'm working during a lot of this time, and one of the reasons I decided to take a real chance and become a freelancer was because I knew that if I had a 9-to-5 job, I was really worried I was going to miss out on something special, and I would have. So I I realize that's a privileged position that I was able to do. And not everybody has that privilege, but I have to say, thank goodness my wife, who's incredible, was willing to take a flyer with me, because otherwise I don't have that experience. I'm not standing there. It's not the same. Also, by the way, which she probably regrets, I don't hike the AT, I don't hike the PCT, I don't hike the CT, but really, truly, I don't want to be naive. I understand people have challenges and limitations that fortunately I didn't. Our kid has grown, blah, blah. He's CU graduate, doing great. But I encourage people. It's easy to get afraid and not take that chance. And there's no guarantee your chance comes out. But if you don't take the chance, you literally never know. And you might miss something. So
Amen.
I know, I do understand, if I had a kid and was a single mom or something. So I'm very privileged, but by God, if you possibly can, take your chances.
Amen. Amen. And you have to find out what's important to you in order to figure out what chance to take, right? But I think people intuitively know it, but it can be scary. Well, Clay, that was awesome conversation, man. I really enjoyed you sharing your stories. Give me a title list of your works, of your books, including, we'll start with Bones of My Grandfather. Just if someone were to Google, or you could probably just Google Clay Bonnyman Evans, and the works will pop up. But give me a list of your books.
I have one book that's out of print.
Sorry, Clay. I actually just lost you just for a second there. Start over with your just at the top with your book list if you can. Thank you.
Yeah. You can search my name, Bonnyman, at Amazon, or actually anywhere online, and my books should come up. I have one book that's I am going to republish, but I'll just mention it. You might be interested. It sounds boring. It's not because of me, but because of the story. It is actually about McGuckin Hardware in Boulder, Colorado.
All right.
Which is, you think, oh, who cares about a hardware store? But I'm telling you, if you're interested in the way the economy used to work and maybe some ways forward, it's worth reading. So it's called Behind the Green Vest. Bones of My Grandfather is the World War II book. My cowboy book is called I See by Your Outfit. My AT book is called The Trail is the Teacher. My PCT book should be available by the end of March 2022, tentatively, but probably going to be called Adrift on the Pacific Crest Trail. If you really think you want to be a collector, you can find out of print copies of my kids' book, which is called The Winter Witch.
Awesome. Clay, appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your story and your perspective, and all the best on your Continental Divide Trail coming up here in April.
Thank you very much. It's been great talking to you. You have quite the resume as well. So I appreciate when people take the bull by the horns and live what they want to live. It's worth doing.
Amen. Thanks, Clay.
Thanks, man.
And there you have it, Clay Bonnyman Evans, episode 41 of the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please subscribe and follow if you enjoy listening to the show. We got new episodes that come out the first and third Friday of every month. More info, www.buffaloroamer.com. Go outside, get some fresh air, go make some stories and adventures of your own.